So can everybody see the screen? Graham, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, Kathleen, Graham, thank you for having me today to talk to these individuals about food safety for growing, harvesting, and handling fruits and vegetables. My name is Andre Salazar, an Ag Natural Resource Extension and Outreach Specialist with the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I am responsible for the Safe Produce Program, which is an A&R program. So, with that being said, we will go ahead and move forward. So, this presentation is titled Food Safety for Growing and Harvesting and Handling Fruits and Vegetables. What we're going to talk about, if I can get the cursor to work, there we go, is food safety. So, what is food safety? These are some interesting questions to ask. Does aesthetic quality equal safe to eat food safety? In other words, because food looks good, is it safe to eat? Does spoiled food cause foodborne illness? Just because the food looks spoiled, will it make you sick? Can you visually identify food that causes foodborne illness? And what causes foodborne illness? And how to prevent foodborne illness? So these are some of the questions that we hope to answer for you with this seminar. Let's go right into it. So what is foodborne illness? By my definition, from my knowledge and professional experience, food safety, what is food safety? Not foodborne illness. That's the next slide, couple of slides coming up. So what is food safety? Food safety is the awareness and actions in handling, preparing, and storing food to eliminate hazards that contaminate and cross-contaminate food and food contact surfaces, resulting in the prevention of foodborne illness. That's a pretty big sentence, but what it's saying is it's being aware and having the actions in the handling, preparing, and storing of food to basically eliminate the hazards that contaminate the food and food contact surfaces to prevent foodborne illness. So because it's such a big statement, and we're going to go through some of these terms throughout the presentation, we'll go ahead and define them relative to fruit and vegetable growing and harvesting. What is food? Well, in terms of fruit and vegetable production, it is the harvested and consumable part of the plant. When you harvest produce, becomes a raw agricultural commodity, and its intent is to be harvested for some use, generally food. So once you make that harvest, that becomes food. Food contact surface is any human or material object surface that contacts the harvested part of the plant. So any human or material object surface that contacts food. A hazard is a material or an event contaminating food and food contact surfaces. Contamination is the addition of material that affects the quality of the food or food contact surface. Take a moment here to look at the difference between hazard and contamination. A hazard is the subject. Contamination is the action. Cross-contamination, which is similar to contamination, but slightly different, and you'll hear more about that later in the presentation, is a transfer of hazardous material from one surface to another. And a foodborne illness is the effect of consuming contaminated food. So, let's dive right into what a foodborne illness is. I told you that slide was coming up. So, foodborne illness is the intestinal infection with pathogenic microorganisms producing a self-limiting immune response and possible severe sequelae. So, foodborne illness is an infection with pathogenic microorganisms, much like flu and the common cold are a respiratory infection with a pathogenic microorganisms, influenza virus, or rhinovirus. So what you're really getting when you get a foodborne illness is an infection from a pathogenic microorganisms. Some of these pathogenic microorganisms, which are the hazards, come with specific sources relative to foodborne illness. The main source is fecal material, and those are bacteria such as E. coli H70157, Salmonella, Campylobacter, and the viruses norovirus, hepatitis A virus, and the parasites Cyclosporia, Giardia, and Cryptosporidium. The other source of a hazard, pathogenic microorganisms in growing and harvesting produce, is soil. Soil contains Listeria monocytogenes, which is an environmental microorganism. So with foodborne illness, the way you get it, the transmission, is what's through fecal oral transmission. And that is the ingestion of a substance contaminated with a hazardous substance, such as fecal material or soil. So you have to eat something that's been contaminated to get a foodborne illness. Because remember, it's an intestinal infection. The outcome, that immune response, is usually of low severity and self-limiting. It's generally diarrhea, vomiting, and malaise, which is just a rather bad feeling. The severe sequelae is usually high severity, and it is an after effect of that initial self-limiting low severity immune response. The severity can be, as a result, can produce hemorrhagic diarrhea, renal failure, fetal miscarriage, and death. What determines the severity of the sequelae is these are generally individuals with immunocompromised systems, such as elderly people, babies below the year of 1, because they still develop an immune system, people on immunocompromising medications, such as cancer patients or pregnant women. So now that we understand where the source is for these hazards, how it gets transmitted, and what are the outcomes, let's evaluate and understand the hazards and risks, the process for hazard and risk assessment. So the one thing you want to do is identify the hazard. And since you can't see these microorganisms, you want to know what is the source. You know that the sources are fecal material and soil. So these are things you can easily identify in your farm operations. You want to know that material or event that's contaminating the food and the food contact surfaces. Also, once you've identified the hazard, the source of the hazard, evaluate the risk. How bad is it? What is the exposure to the hazard? And that is the rate of occurrence and the outcome severity. So how bad is it? Here are some examples. What would be a high-risk situation? If you have high occurrence, high severity. So that would be quite a number of people having something like hemorrhagic diarrhea. A lot of people with a very bad outcome. High risk is also high occurrence, low severity. That would be a high number of people with diarrhea. Even though it's low severity, a high number of people means it's a high risk event. Initial high risk event would be low occurrence, high severity. That would be, for example, a few numbers such as 6 babies with renal failure, or maybe a half dozen pregnant women with experiencing fetal death as a result of foodborne illness. A low risk situation is when there's low occurrence, low severity. That is when a few people have diarrhea and vomiting. Real quickly, I'll add in here, by definition, a foodborne outbreak, which means that when the community should be concerned and the public health officials are concerned about a foodborne illness in the community, is when more than 2 people become infected. So now that you've identified the source and you've evaluated, okay, how bad is it? How often is it occurring? You want to know, is it going to continue? So observe the situation and keep some kind of records about it so that, is there a pattern? Is this going to be happening every week? Or is there some sort of event that's in the pattern that is creating the situation? And after you've done these things, you want to know what's your outcome. So what can you do about it? Well, you can be reactive and wait until you have a foodborne illness in the situation, or you can be proactive and take corrective action, which would be to eliminate the hazard by restricting its access, or reduce the occurrence, which would be a change in behavior pattern. Now, the reason I have traffic stoplights with these 2 slides is because if many of you have a driver's license and drive on any of the operate a motor vehicle on any of the state-controlled roads, you generally are assessing hazards and risks and monitoring and making a decision on your outcome when you drive. Because when you come to a stoplight, you evaluate the other drivers, you understand which is the safest action to take, and then you make a decision to go in that direction. The actions are very similar. We're just going to apply them to your farm operations. So food safety for fruit and vegetable production. On your farm, you are growing, harvesting, and handling food for human consumption. So let's go ahead and apply those principles to your farm. First thing you want to do is you want to identify the hazard. What is the source? Because remember, you won't be able to see these microorganisms, but at least you know what the sources are. And because your farm is in the outdoor exterior, you're going to have environmental exposure to soil and fecal material. You want to evaluate the risk. How bad is that exposure? Well, your rate of occurrence is going to be high because you're in a natural environment. And the level of severity will be low to high because you're growing a raw agricultural commodity for consumption, and you do not know who the consumer will be. So you cannot control the level of severity, but you can control all the other events that occur on your farm. So your level of severity will always be low to high. Your outcome decision, what can you do about anything? Well, you can be reactive and produce contaminated fruits and vegetables, or you can be proactive, take corrective actions, and create food that is safe for human consumption. Let's dip into your farm operations, the growing. Well, your hazard. What is the source of your hazard? Well, in your growing operations, you have 2 sources. One is soil that contains soil pathogens like Clostridium monocytogenes, and the other is fecal material, fecal pathogens. And that is in manure fertilizer, animals getting access to your farm, and employee sanitary behavior. Evaluating the risk, how bad is it? What's the rate of occurrence? Well, it's regular exposure, so the rate of occurrence is going to be high. The level of severity, again, is always low to high because you're not aware of who will be consuming your product. Let's look at some corrective actions. Manure fertilizer, which is a source of fecal pathogens, you want to eliminate that hazard. So, one very, very obvious approach Do not harvest produce visibly contaminated with fecal material. So if you can see fecal material on the produce, the harvestable part of the plant, then do not harvest it. Another approach to eliminate the hazard is to treat your manure through composting. Composting by these two methods is recognized by the FDA to eliminate the pathogenic microorganisms that can be found in manure to a level that's applicable to the safe production of fruits and vegetables for human consumption. Two approaches are static composting treatment, which would be leaving your manure in a pile that has exposure to air and assuring that it reaches a temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days. There's also turned composting treatment, which is allowing your composted manure to reach a temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 days with 5 turnings. Now, if you get your manure fertilizer from a supplier, then assure that you get some certificate of treatment that the supplier went through to compost the material, or at least assure you that it's safe for application on your fruit and vegetable production farm. Once again, we're in corrective actions with manure fertilizer. And you want to reduce, you've looked at eliminating the hazard. Now we want to look at behavior patterns, reducing the hazard occurrence. And these are fecal pathogens. So with manure's fertilizer, it's in the storage and handling that's in the behavior pattern. So you want to risk exposure to your water resources, your ponds, or your open irrigation sources, and your growing area. You want to avoid placing your manure storage area on an upslope location from your water resource area or your crop growing area. And if you also want to install some runoff diversion, such as berms and culverts, in the event that there's rain and the runoff runs off into your field for growing produce. In the picture, you can see how closely the manure pile is next to the growing area. This would be a hazardous situation. For your equipment and tools, working with your manure fertilizer, you want to restrict access to other farm operation areas. So if you use a shovel or if you use other equipment, make sure that you're using it only in that area so you don't transfer that material out into your pack house or other areas in your farm. Or you can inspect, clean, and sanitize your equipment. An additional corrective action with manure fertilizer is to avoid the manure application contact with the harvestable part of the plant. So 2 things. Remember, don't harvest produce visibly contaminated with manure. And the other is to avoid the manure application contact with the harvestable part of the plant. One thing you can do is apply a application to harvest time delay. So for these measures here are established by the National Organic Association, and the FDA recognizes these as standards available to produce farmers that can assist them and guide towards the application of raw, untreated manure to produce farms. An application to harvest time delay approach would be for above ground produce. Have an application to harvest time delay of 90 days. For on ground, or such as cucumbers, or in ground, such as root crop produce like carrots, you want to have a application to harvest time delay of 120 days. We're still in your growing operation. We're talking about the corrective actions. And when it comes to animals, animals contain fecal pathogens. And so you want to eliminate that hazard. And you do that by eliminating their access to your growing area. You can use physical barriers such as fences or netting or things of that nature that restrict them physically from getting access to your growing area, or noise and visual deterrence, which will have the ability to scare the animals away from your farm. The caveat with using noise and visual deterrence is animals generally become accustomed to such events, and it would be necessary to move them every once in a while to make sure the animals don't just begin to walk around them. You also want to eliminate animals' access to your water resources area, such as your pond or whatever irrigation source you have, because animals, once again, may contain and usually contain some form of fecal pathogen. And water sources during irrigation are a good transmission mechanism to transfer fecal pathogens into your growing area and onto your food being produced in your area. With your water resources, you want to use physical barriers and noise and visual deterrence as well. Now, when it comes to your employees, you want to have some level of sanitary behavior for employees to restrict the exposure of fecal pathogens to your produce. You want to reduce the occurrence of their exposure. And this is done through education and training of your employees. And some subjects are such as personal hygiene, hand sanitation, teaching your employees how to wash their hands, and food safety and hygiene, such as things as not harvesting produce visibly contaminated with fecal material, and understanding not to apply raw manure directly to your produce. You want to provide your employees with access to sanitary facilities such as toilets. You don't want your employees going to the bathroom out in the growing area. No. And you also want to have hand washing facilities with clean drinking water that is of drinking water quality. And soap, not alcohol sanitizers, because soap will kill bacteria and remove any material that could contain pathogenic microorganisms. And single-use drying towels or some other sanitary method of single use that allows employees to dry their hands. Now we'll move into the harvesting part of your farm operation. Once again, we want to look at the hazards. So, what is the source of the hazard? Well, soil again, because you have soil pathogens. And this is going to be a result of your employee sanitary behavior. So, think about produce safety and produce hygiene education. And fecal material containing fecal pathogens. And that'll be a result of animal access and, once again, employee sanitary behavior. The risk, how bad is it? Well, the rate of occurrence, the regular exposure is going to be high. So you're going to have a high risk because of its continuous exposure. And once again, the level of severity is low to high. So when it comes to soil and taking a corrective action, you want to eliminate the hazard, the soil pathogens. So one approach, restrict harvest equipment and tool access to other farm operation areas. In other words, whatever tools or equipment you're using in harvest, use them in the harvest area and don't bring them into the other areas. An example would be to separate the harvest bins, the field bins, from the post-harvest bins, the packhouse bins. One way to do it would be to insert a harvest bin inside a post-harvest bin inside a harvest bin during field harvest, as you see in the picture available right there. You want to maintain harvest tool access to harvest areas. Keep your harvest tools in your harvest area and don't bring them into the post-harvest area. If you do bring them into the post-harvest area or you allow them access out of the harvest area, inspect, clean, and sanitize your harvesting equipment and tools. While harvesting, another way to eliminate the hazard of soil pathogens is in your produce harvest, separate, do not mix your above ground produce, such as your leafy greens and your tomatoes, from your in-ground and on-ground produce, such as your cucumbers, your carrots and radishes. In your harvest sequence, you want to harvest your above ground produce first so that they maintain separation from your in-ground produce, non-ground produce. So you want to harvest your above ground produce first, followed by your in and on-ground produce. Another suggestion would be to clean the soil and trim the produce out in the field. This eliminates the chance of bringing in more hazardous material into your post-harvest area. And do not harvest produce that's dropped to the ground. So once you harvest produce, specifically above ground produce, and you drop it to the ground, you've now contaminated that produce. And you do not want to, it's advisable not to allow it to enter the food chain. When you're harvesting, animals will get access to your field. It happens regardless of the method you use, such as restricting their access. So if they do get access to your field when you're harvesting, survey and identify the harvest areas with indicators for animal activity. You want to segregate these areas contaminated by animal activity and fecal material and avoid harvesting produce in the segregated areas. This assures you that you are not going to be harvesting produce that may be or is visibly contaminated with fecal material. While you're harvesting, a corrective action for it is your employee's sanitary behavior. You want to eliminate the hazard, which is soil and fecal pathogens, through education and training of your employees. Their personal hygiene, such as hand sanitation, how to wash their hands. And you also want to restrict eating access in the harvesting area. Remember, it's a fecal-oral transmission route. And so you want to ensure that people aren't eating in your harvest area during your harvest activities. You want to train your employees on food safety and hygiene. So do not harvest produce visibly contaminated with fecal material, and do not harvest produce that's dropped to the ground. Now that you've grown and harvested your produce, we're now going to move into your farm operation of handling. So once again, identify your source. Well, your sources are soil pathogens, and this occurs through cross-contamination. So cross-contamination, remember, is the contamination from transfer from one surface to another surface. Soil pathogens can result from employee sanitary behavior. Fecal material with fecal pathogens is a hazard in your handling area by animal accents, and once again, employee sanitary behavior. How bad is it? What is the risk level? Well, the rate of occurrence will be regular exposure, but you're now at a low to medium level. Most of your hazards will exist in the natural environment. So once you've grown and harvested your produce, you're now in, how shall we say this, the man-made environment, your pack shed, your cooling area, your refrigeration unit. And once also, your level of severity is low to high because you don't know who's going to be eating your produce. Some corrective actions here for soil pathogens would be to eliminate the hazard. Once again, separate. Do not mix your above ground produce with your in and on ground produce. In your process sequence, process your above ground produce followed by your in and on ground produce to avoid the contamination of your food contact surfaces from the soil that's on your on ground produce to your soil to your above ground produce during this sequence. And do not process produce that's been dropped to the ground because once again, it now becomes contaminated. And when it comes to food packaging, such as boxes or packages, clamshells or whatever, or paper wrapping, always use single-use packaging to avoid contaminating your produce with previously packaged produce contamination. One approach to processing your produce in the post-harvest area, in the handling area, is to use post-harvest processed water, washing your produce. The best option is a single pass produce wash. But any of your post-harvest processed water should be of clean water, of drinking water quality. So the best option, single pass produce wash, like in the picture, spraying the soil and dirt or whatever off of produce. But if you can't use a single pass produce wash and use a tank water wash, such as a double sink, where you're putting the produce in one, cleaning it, and then putting it in the other to rinse it off. Monitor the water quality because the water quality will degrade the more produce you put in because you're removing the soil or other debris from the produce. And at this point, the produce becomes at high risk for cross-contamination. So that's why you want to monitor the water quality. And if you can use a sanitizer, if possible, because a sanitizer will isolate the contaminant to the produce surface by disallowing it to transfer in the water to another surface. If you use a sanitizer, make sure it's food grade for use on fruits and vegetables and food contact surfaces. In your handling area, to eliminate soil pathogens from food contact surfaces, you want to inspect your food contact surfaces for any filth or damage. Now, filth is filth. It's just that grimy stuff that you see everywhere. And that is on your food contact surfaces. So you want to inspect for filth, but you also want to inspect for damage. Why damage? Because filth can get into damage and continue to contaminate produce as produce makes contact with that damaged area. So inspect for filth and damage so that you can at least clean, put a little extra attention in cleaning in that damaged area, or possibly repair it. Cleaning is the physical removal of filth, and this can be done with physically by brushing the filth off, but a better approach would be to use soap and water. If you use clean with soap and water, use drinking water quality water, and make sure your soap is a food grade soap for use with food contact surfaces and fruits and vegetables. Now, I will give you a little inside tip here. Food grade soap is equivalent to dishwashing liquid that you'd use in your sink when washing your dinner plates, because that is food grade soap for a food contact surface. Doesn't have to be anything special, just dishwashing liquid's fine. Then you want to sanitize, when appropriate, any of your food contact surfaces. And sanitizing is a chemical thermal elimination of microorganisms. If you're going to sanitize, use a food grade sanitizer for use on food contact surfaces or fruits and vegetables. In your handling area, additional corrective actions for animal access are to eliminate the hazards of fecal pathogens. And this is generally associated with pests, vermin, pets. Okay. Now, in your handling area, you're going to have this is the place where you've already harvested, you've already packaged. Now you're storing your material to be shipped out to whatever market or commercial accessibility you have. These areas can be storage sheds, pack houses, cooling rooms, refrigeration units, things of this nature. To eliminate any vermin and pets, you want to eliminate access with some level of physical barrier. So when it comes to pets, many people believe that having the cat wandering around in the pack house is good because the cat eliminates the mice. But unfortunately, what you don't know is where that cat goes in the day when you're not looking. So having the cat wander around your pack house increases the chance of contaminating your fruits and vegetables that you spent all this time keeping safe from contamination. Create physical barriers to keep the pests, and the vermin out, the mice. Another way to eliminate the access to vermin and pests is general housekeeping. Eliminate any attractions such as produce discards or any debris or filth that would naturally attract mice, roaches, flies. And if you're going to use food packaging in your pack house, assure that you're using single-use packaging. When it comes to your employee sanitary behavior and your handling operation, you want to eliminate the hazard of soil and fecal pathogens. And once again, with your employees, it's always education and training. You want to let them understand their personal hygiene and how it affects your operation, specifically in hand sanitation, washing their hands, and restricting eating access in the handling area. And you also want to train and educate your employees on some general housekeeping to assure that the handling area can be maintained in such a way that it doesn't attract vermin, pests, mice. You want to provide your employees access to sanitary facilities, such as toilets that are clean and sanitary, and hand washing facilities that contain drinking quality clean water, soap, not alcohol sanitizers, and single-use drying towels or some other sanitary method of hand drying. Well, you've seen quite a bit of information about food safety on your fruit and vegetable farm. So how does it really work? Well, let's go through these steps again. You want to identify the hazard source, the material or event contaminating your food and food contact surfaces. You want to evaluate how bad is the risk, and that is the hazard rate of occurrence and the outcome severity. You want to monitor if it's going to continue, observe and record. You want to be able to understand, is this a regular pattern? Is from this event, is there a pattern of behavior that allows this event to continue? And you want to choose a proactive outcome, a corrective action, eliminate the hazard, restrict its access. Do not disallow the occurrence. And you also want to use a corrective action to reduce the hazard occurrence by changing the behavior pattern. And this is done by, for example, employee education and training. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Urban Agricultural Food Safety for Urban Farms webinar attendees, all you guys that are here listening to me talk. And also Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, Urban Agriculture, Graham Sanderfeld, and Kathleen Dollett. If you'd like additional information in these areas or have questions to ask in the near future or any time in the future, you can always come to the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Safe Produce Program website. That's the QR code for the website. But you can always type in that and look it up. If you would like additional education and training in this subject area, the Safe Produce Program sponsors Produce Safety Alliance Grower Training, which is FDA-approved food safety education for fruit and vegetable production. It's usually on the events tab on our website. Currently, we have 2 in-person events, one in Lynn County in Hiawatha, the other in Wharton County in Indianola. You can always contact me. That's the email address. If you contact the email address for the Safe Produce Program or phone the number on the Safe Produce Program website, that information comes to me. Or send me a letter, 2321 Farm Sciences Building, 536 Farmhouse Lane, Ames, Iowa, at the University campus. So finally, if you don't mind, I would appreciate it if you pick up your cell phone, click on that QR code right there, and answer 4 questions for me. It's real simple. Most of them are yes or no or something along those lines. You can do it real quickly. It allows us to have feedback to understand what your experience was and how can we improve our experience. All your information is anonymous, confidential, and private. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and open the situation up for any questions. Graham, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, thank you. Thank you again, Andre, for that presentation. We have, like I said, we have a question and answer feature for this webinar, so please submit your questions if you have any. We have about 15 minutes still of time to answer them, but I'll go ahead and get started relaying some questions that were submitted to you, Andre. So I have a scenario asking about, could water itself be a hazard leading to an intestinal illness? I never knew if that's what I picked up from drinking water from an underground rain catchment system on a farm that I was told was sanitary. Symptoms included stomachache and general malaise.
Graham, is there any possibility that you could post that in the chat?
Yes.
So I could read it? That might be easier. Okay. So what the question is could water itself be a hazard leading to an intestinal illness? I never knew if that's what I picked up from drinking water from an underground rain catchment system on a farm that I was told was sanitary. Symptoms included stomach ache and general malaise. Well, yes. As a matter of fact, historically, developed out of the transmission of waterborne illness. You could Google Broad Street Pump. It's back in the 1800s in England. I think it was, I can't remember what disease it was, but water is an excellent vehicle for transmitting foodborne or waterborne illnesses. And judging by your information here, even if it was rainwater, but it was an underground water catchment, what needs to be understood is that when the rain comes down from the sky, it's generally sanitary. Once it makes contact with the surface on the earth, it now becomes surface water and it's exposed to any contaminant that is in the surface. So in this situation, there's a possibility that one, as the rain was caught in some sort of catchment that transferred it to the underground reservoir, there was some contamination on a surface that was absorbed into the water and then transferred into the underground catchment, the basin. Or it could have been that the basin itself was contaminated due to some animal exposure or something like this. So, yeah, water itself isn't really a hazard, but it remains a vehicle for transmission.
Thank you.
Actually, I did quite a bit of research. I first did a lot of my research in waterborne diseases, and there are a few of them. In your description, a stomach ache and general malaise, that's probably a waterborne disease.
All right, thank you. I have a follow-up question, I suppose, about is there anything as a consumer you can do post-harvest, after it's reached the market, or if there's a concern that a consumer has with a certain product, is there anything they should do preventative for washing or anything like that that they can kind of assure themselves that it's safer, or does that even help?
First, let me state this, that because of the federal regulations in place, there is laws that require farmers to take certain actions when producing fruits and vegetables for human consumption that are to guide them to produce produce that's safe for human consumption. And that's referred to as standards for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding produce for human consumption, also known as the Produce Safety Rule. That's a federal regulation. So that's in place there. Now, part of what the Food Safety Modernization Act also did, it required states to develop food safety programs for produce inspection for food safety, as well as an educational arm for allowing the farmers to be educated and the general public to be educated regarding food safety with fruits and vegetables. That's how I got this job. So those two pieces in there are infrastructurally what's in place to put the mechanisms toward food safety for fruit and vegetable production. Now, I can assure you that I am one of, well over 100,000 people involved in all the 50 states, and territories, assuring that we work together to provide the regulatory action plus the educational technical assistance to produce food that's safe for human consumption. Your food is safe. There's a lot of people working on this, and we don't take it very lightly. We take it very seriously. For me, FDA regularly puts out information monthly to assure that my information about the regulation and or applications of the regulation is up to date so that I can transfer this information to the public and the farmers. It also regularly educates inspectors on to assure they're up to date with their abilities to assure farmers are complying with the federal regulations. So that's just the infrastructure in and of itself. There's a lot of stuff in place. Um, for me personally, when I buy produce, um, I wash it. And if I can, I usually use some dish soap when I wash my produce. And I put dish soap in my hands and I create a lather like this. And I'm going to use my foam rubber tomato that I have on my desk right here. And I wash it very gently, enough so that the surface gets exposed and I can be somewhat confident that I've done my part to assure food that in my house that I'm going to consume is safe for me to eat. It was a long answer, but
Mhm.
um, I would like people on this seminar to understand that there isn't a very large infrastructure in place to assure on multiple levels that the food that they eat, the fruits and vegetables, is safe for consumption.
Thank you. So, for example, from the perspective of like an urban farmer, you can presume, they might enter their first foray into a marketplace might be a farmer's market. Are there the same sort of rules and regulations about food safety um, to be able to sell at a farmer's market versus like a supermarket or some other type of brick and mortar market?
There are some details with that question that will kind of separate out real quick. Retail establishments are private industries, so they will have their own requirements for allowing a vendor to participate in their retail activities, operations. So, that being said, the federal regulations are the overall guideline. Many retail establishments work through what is something called good agricultural practice, and that the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule was built on the concept of good agricultural practices, which were established by the USDA. Many retail agencies take the Food Safety Modernization Act and good agricultural practices and move them up a few notches because their incentive is market driven. If they have a foodborne outbreak, it's associated with their retail establishment, then market forces will have an effect. People won't buy produce at that store. I mean, we've all seen, for example, Chipotle. When Chipotle had the E. coli outbreaks, a lot of people just avoided, went to Panera for or whatever that other place is for Mexican food. Um, Market force driving them to assure that they maintain a level. And that's why when a retail establishment institutes to a farmer, here's our practices we'd like you to follow, they're much, much higher than the federal regulations. When it comes to a farmer's market, um, that is generally regulated by the county and possibly through their public health. Each county in the state of Iowa is different.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I still have, or I'm still waiting for any more questions. If there's lingering questions from the chat or the attendees, um, you can go ahead and open the Q&A box and submit one, but I don't see any more at the moment. So I'll give it another maybe 30 seconds or a minute before we can call it, and then we can end the webinar if we don't have any more questions.
Well, I guess one thing I'd like to say about all of this is that many of the farms I visit, when farmers ask me to come out and, hey, could you come look at, give me some advice, some technical assistance. For example, this program also offers like what we pseudo FDA inspections. We have a program where we do a mock FDA inspection on a farm, run them through the same process as an FDA inspector, prepare them for an inspection. What many farmers tell me is that, well, this is a lot of common sense. And it is a lot of common sense. There might be some details that are you maybe a farmer's not familiar with, but a lot of it is common sense. This is why early in the slide set, I equated it to driving a vehicle. You come to an intersection and you start looking around and saying, okay, what can cause damage to me in my car? And then you start to say, how bad is it? How often is this going to happen? Is that person going to run the stoplight? Is that person going to turn in front of me? And you're evaluating the situation for the level of risk you have. And then you make a decision. I'm going to wait. I'm going to turn this direction, or I'm going to go now. And so your farm operates in the same situation. And like I say, a lot of farmers from when I do mock inspections say this. It's a lot of common sense, but there are just some details they may be missing, some additional information that they need to understand mechanisms or reasoning and logic. And that's why we provide this information to farmers. Give them the additional information, the reasoning and logic to assist them in the safe production of their fruits and vegetables. So is
Thank
that
you.
3 minutes worth of talk?
Yeah. Um, that's all we have time for, but I'll give one more reminder for everyone who's still here. Check out the Iowa State Urban Project webpage. If you just Google Iowa State Urban Agriculture, you can find it. And then check out Andre's organization, the Safe Produce Program with Iowa State. And if you're interested in nearby any of those in-person events, you can sign up at their website. Thank you again, Andre.
Thank you very much, Graham and Kathleen.
And everyone have a great day. Okay, bye.